This is an interesting question. I think it's both. It's both, and I think a lot of it is influenced by Zionist theology, and even before we get to Zionist theology, I think it's based of influenced by theology or by spiritual practices that do not pay attention to the Middle East, and it's marginalized, and it's only part of like Mission Week once a year, if anything. But then even then, when you do Mission Week or whatever kind of conversations you have about Christians and the Middle East, you mostly focus on Muslim persecution of Christians. So that doesn't apply to Palestine because our persecution is not from Muslims, it's actually from Jews. So that's really uncomfortable. So even when you talk about missions, that's not even something that you pay attention to. And theology and church life and church practices, they tend to be very individualistic or localized. So it's about your own spiritual walk. It's about your own quiet time with God. It's about maybe if you have a good community, it's about the time you spend with your community. So spiritual practices and Christian life in the West especially tend to be very isolated and localized. So you just don't pay attention. You don't really care. It's not something that you pay attention to as part of your, how you read the news or how you engage with the world. Kind of, if the U.S. is the center of the world, why would you pay attention to anything outside of this country? And to be fair, media and culture and the news kind of tend to direct people's attention to the inside of this country and not outside. But then also we have to be aware of the influence of dispensational theology, of these apocalyptic fancies about the rapture and the end times and the dispensations and the Jewish migration to the land and how that plays a role in the return of Christ, and all of these kind of really problematic theological formulations, how prevalent they are. And then you add on top of that the influence of Zionist theology, which is kind of this uncritical support of Israel that is coupled with complete disregard of the Palestinian, and also hostility and bigotry towards the Arab and the Muslim. So all of these kind of are stacked together on top of each other, which makes it almost impossible for the average person to snap out of it and do that work. Because it's just the whole culture, the whole church life, spiritual practices, all of these together are set up in a way where you're not expected to pay attention to that. So there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of work to be done, whether it's with the church community and how you live in that community and what faith looks like. There's work to be done among church leaders, pastors, theologians, what kind of work they do, what kind of theology they are producing and influencing their community with. That is it a theology that makes them sensitive towards these issues, or is it one that insulates them that becomes more about self-help and about a doctrine and end times or about predestination, or all these kind of conversations that are really at the end of the day have no practical significance, and they become these kind of exercises in futility with no real implication, especially when at the church so many Christians support Israel, so many Christians are very ardent defenders of Israel against the Palestinians, with so much of the US government and its power and its money and is used against the Palestinians and normalizing and furthering the suffering and the injustice of the Palestinians. So there's so much work that has to be done to unshackle all of these kind of cultural blinders and theological blinders and kind of break out of it and go back to the basics of the faith of loving neighbor and loving enemy and actually pursuing Christ in the world and not isolating ourselves from that world.